Today's guest is Jake Lemon, Senior Vice President of Development of the UConn Foundation. UConn's fundraising operation has been transformed since Jake arrived in 2016, and he shares the importance of balancing innovation with no-nonsense development principles in pursuit of UConn's record-breaking results. Jake also shares why he's so passionate about gift planning and why you should be too. Here we go. Greetings, Raise listeners. We are making history today as I record the first version of this podcast, first episode from the passenger seat of an RV as my family and I take work from anywhere to a new extreme and move from New England to Iowa, not forever, but for a short-term period here in the midst of COVID. And so with that, I am thrilled to welcome Jake Lemon to today's episode. And we've known Jake for a long time. He currently serves as Senior Vice President of Development for the UConn Foundation. And in that role, Jake oversees planned giving, corporate and foundation relations, constituent health, and athletic fundraising programs. And I know that you're going to enjoy hearing about Jake's journey. Welcome, Jake.
Thanks, Brent. Glad to be here. A little jealous that you're hopping in the RV and the work from anywhere, but own it. I'm jealous. You've just given me an idea.
We'll see how it goes. My colleague Laura really wanted Evertrue branding all over my family's RV to turn it into some kind of college tour, but we're going to have to table that until the fall at least. I want to start by just learning that in the midst of a crazy period here in 2020, you all just wrapped what is a record-breaking year from a revenue perspective at UConn. I want to acknowledge that my understanding is almost $90 million raised, up from a prior high of the low 80s. And I think some of that is, it sounds like due to a strong start, but also being able to persevere and get through some challenging times. So we're going to dive into all of that, but I want to start by congratulating you.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate it.
I first want to go back to the Magnolia State and young Jake Lemon, who there's just no way he anticipated growing up outside of Jackson, Mississippi, that his lifelong aspiration would be to get up to the Northeast. And I just know that's not how it works in elementary school in Mississippi. So give me a little bit of the setup of who you were and what led you down this path of the world of higher education advancement.
Sure. So you're right. Having plans to move to New England and lead a development division at UConn probably was not, in the cards many years ago. But I did grow up Central Mississippi. I'm an Ole Miss grad, undergrad and graduate degree. And I had a pretty strong background in financial planning, financial advising, heavy finance MBA, and I thought my path would be financial planning, a wealth advisor. And I started that path and realized very quickly that I just didn't like it. I mean, it's a great profession and it's a much needed profession. It wasn't fulfilling to me, and so I stumbled into major gift fundraising. Started at Ole Miss for a short time. I was an athlete into college, and so I felt like, well, maybe athletic development would be my path. And so spent about 3 years at UAB as an athletic development professional, and it was a great growth experience, but always wanted to go back to that financial planning expertise, and gift planning was just a passion of mine, and thought I probably need to chase that passion, and I did. And there was a job open at Florida State, and that was really where I basically launched my career. It's where I really just got so involved and engaged in the industry and the impact. Spent about 7.5 years there, sort of moving up the chain, started in gift planning and was able to create regional development, was able to create what principal gifts looked like at Florida State, and staffed the president through a campaign. It was a great time. And I was just at a stage in my career, in my life, where I knew that I needed a stretch position somewhere to lead a division. And UConn's position was open. Josh Newton, who I know is engaged with Evertrue and has been for years, he was CEO at that time. And Josh is he's a great persuader, and he's a closer, and he closed me, and I'm so glad he did 4 years ago. And New England's been a great growth opportunity for me professionally, but also personally for my family, and we've loved it up here. And it's pretty special at the end of a fiscal year now. And our books closed on 7/15, so 5 days after books closing, to look up and not only look up during a traditional year, but look up in a year like this and see that we're about 10% higher versus our historical high. It was due to a strong start somewhat, but also to a really, really strong close. And it's just been an experiment on employee engagement and culture and morale, because in a time like this, you either go all in with that or you see that you haven't done so enough. So 15-year journey in this industry to UConn, proud to be here and proud to be on the cast today with you, sharing some things
Awesome.
about our operation.
I mean, can't wait to dive into a bunch of that, but I do think it's really interesting that you felt like the financial advisory path was not the right path. And I'd love to know more about when you realized that, and frankly,
Yeah.
how you go from that realization to even discovering the world of philanthropy. And it is interesting. I mean, you say you wanted to be a wealth advisor, and I would argue that in your role, you are, and it sounds like you've embraced that aspect of it, especially in the gift planning space. We can get more into that, but take me back to your mindset where, recent college grad, you do the business school kind of program, you want to get into the financial space, and I'm sure a lot of other people, in your class were trying to do the same thing, and you can make a great living and all of that, but why is it, do you think, that it just didn't click?
Yeah, so great question. Lot of good things here. So I guess first, why it didn't click. I just realized early on that I wasn't in a position to necessarily solve a lot of problems. Of course, we could help people, and again, a great industry. My father was in the industry for years and years. I have a lot of respect for it. But for me, I was seeking something that was, I guess, a little more meaningful personally. And I probably realized a year, and probably less than a year, honestly, Brent. It was probably 6 to 9 months. I realized, I can keep pushing here. I can keep using grit and education to do well, but doing well and being fulfilled are two very separate things. So I did realize, though, that through the training that I received, I realized very quickly I could get an appointment. I mean, I could get in front of someone. I could build rapport. I could find some sort of issue that needed resolution. I could pitch the resolution, and I could close a deal. And as I learned more about major gift fundraising, and that was actually through my MBA career advisor, I went back to him and said, I don't know what to do. I'm not in the right place. He's the one that's sort of semi-jokingly said, I think you'd be a great major gift officer. But back then, not a lot of people knew about this industry. But as he taught me a little bit more about it and I learned, I said, you know what, I can take those things that I learned, from financial advising, and I can really overlay them in this industry. And, my mentality early on was just don't overthink it. I'm not going to overthink this industry. I'm going to use the skills and the training that I had before. And, year one, I crossed my fingers and said, I'm going to rely on those principles. And now year 15, I look up and I haven't changed those principles. I mean, of course, polished things and have learned a lot and experienced a lot more. But those core principles of production have really, really held true. So I do think that, for people in the wealth advisory business who might look at this field as a great fit, it certainly can be, and I'm not the only
Yeah.
one that I know who has made that transition. But it has been
So,
very, very rewarding, and looking forward to being in this career. Really, I mean, in this industry, my entire career.
I mean, I love the fact that you actually reached out to that undergraduate career advisor and benefited from the life cycle, your own sort of full access to lifelong resources. And at the same time, I gotta ask, similarly, when was it in your first moments in the higher education advancement field where you felt the opposite way to your
Yeah.
6 to 9 months, sort of know you weren't on the path in the financial sector? Was there an early moment, an early experience where you're like, yes, like this is it?
Without a doubt. So I would say the conviction that I had that higher ed advancement was the right path for me was far quicker than financial advising not being my path. You know, Brent, uh, I got a lot out of public education. I'm a public school guy from a higher ed perspective. It changed me. It opened my lens through which I view the world. It was a transformative experience for me, and just I realized I'll tell you this. I remember taking my final test of my MBA. This would have been years prior. My final test, and I'm done. And I remember a sadness. I mean, it wasn't a celebratory to me. Hey, I was sad, and I was like, "What is going on?" It's because I just feel at home on a university campus. My values align with public higher education, and I'm a big person about fit, and feel. And when I step on a campus, I just feel united with it. I feel at peace. And so I knew really, really early on, if I'm gonna go out and bust my tail in a career to make a difference, and of course make an advantageous career for myself and my family, I wanted to do it in a space that was deeply meaningful to me. And I could not imagine a better fit. And again, forever how long I continue to work, which I got a lot of years left, it will absolutely be in the higher ed space, just because of that profound fit.
Any moments early on in that journey, either at Ole Miss or at UAB, felt like you were able to run that set of plays you described? Get the meeting, engage the person, understand where they're coming from, identify a solution or an opportunity, and close it. I mean, was there like an early cycle where you're like, I just did that end to end, I want to do that a whole lot more?
Yeah, like I said, before, when I first got into this, I certainly wasn't opposed to taking direction, right? I mean, I'm going to take direction and coaching from supervisors, but you know, what I quickly realized is if I just focus on the fundamentals, because too many people in this industry look too far out. They're trying to plan on what is this relationship going to look like in 3 months and 6 months and 9 and 12. And I just decided to sort of abide by the expected outcome model. Every single touch, you got to have an expected outcome. You got to work to that outcome. And I don't think we adopt that all that much in this industry. Some shops do beautifully, but I mean, broadly, it's not adopted as much as it is in the corporate world. And so, I mean, as far as I can remember, Brent, I always went back to those fundamentals and still do today. And I share that with people. If I'm fortunate enough to be able to have an onboarding presence with a new development professional, which I always love doing, no matter how large our shop gets, I like that. I try to instill in that. I think it builds a sense of confidence, a sense of comfort, kind of relieving anxiety that you're going into this office building to sit down with that prospect today. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to think 2 years from now what's the principal gift ask going to be. Just have an expected outcome, do it, come back to home base, strategize, plan, and do it again. And that's
So
certainly worked for
what's
me
an
and it's worked for some of
example?
my teams.
What's an example of that expected outcome model? And really, you obviously have a point of view about when that doesn't happen and what a visit or conversation like that could look like versus how you would approach it based on your experience. And so
Yep.
if I were one of your officers and you were coaching me, what's an example of how I might be conducting a meeting without that expected outcome approach, and what kind of coaching and feedback might you give along the way?
Yeah, so I think the qualification visit probably fits the best here. That first visit, we statistically know that someone is someone we should know, and whether that's through data science or whether it's through a pipeline from leadership giving up to major and principal gifts. But that qualification visit fits perfectly because if you don't have the absolute expected outcome of going in, and I heard someone say this the other day. I used to say being tastefully aggressive, but I heard someone else in the industry say gracefully aggressive. And I'm going to steal that. I'm not going to say tastefully aggressive, but being gracefully aggressive in saying, I am going to find out today whether or not you and I, prospect, should dance from an engagement and major gift standpoint, whether or not you are open to the conversation, making absolute certain, from my perspective, that that prospect knows exactly what I do. And what I've always said to first-time development professionals is, if you walk into a qualification meeting and you have your 45 minutes with this prospect in a cafe, in an office, or Zoom for this at this point in time, but if you were to do that, development professional, you left that office after your 45-minute meeting and I came right behind you and I said to that prospect, what does that person do for a living? If that person can't give me a pretty good explanation of what you do, then I think you failed in that qualification. And so it's a perfect example where if you don't have that expected outcome in that type of meeting, I mean, Brent, sometimes it takes 6 months to get in front of people. It might take 9, might take a year. And so if you aren't taking absolute advantage through that expected outcome model, you're slowing the closing of an impactful gift by months, maybe even years.
Like if you were sort of going into it with a mindset of, I need to be as efficient as possible, I need to disqualify anyone in my portfolio who isn't a legitimate mutual fit, would that change the way versus like qualification is so hopeful and how do I get them there versus disqualifying?
Hey, great. That's a fantastic point. Again, something that I used to have in my mind. And now, again, if I'm lucky enough to coach a new individual in the industry, which is really, really rewarding, I kind of have my thumb model. So if you, again, just talking about qualification visits here, you need to walk into that qualification and walk out with either this is a success, this is a success, this is not a success, might be even defined as a waste of time and money. So that's why training around qualification is so important, because just little phrases, again, that really wrap your approach in being gracefully aggressive. And I do think that you can come with it out of respect for the donor as well, and their time and their engagement. And once you get really comfortable with the qualification visit, which is the most difficult, so it's the hardest one to get, it's the hardest one to execute. I just firmly believe that more training on the early end of pipeline development moves the needle in a bigger way than necessarily training on the far end of the pipeline. Because once a prospective donors get engaged in what we're doing, that's the fun stuff. That's fun.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you approach a qualification visit, though, do you think about it as, is this person qualified, or is it thumbs up, thumbs down, or in the middle, or is the right question to ask, might this person be qualified? And what I mean by that is, it is a little bit circular, right? If you walk in with the graceful aggressiveness, and you view it as binary, like, is this person a major donor prospect or not? Let's just assume most of the time the answer is, like, at this very moment, no, they're not. However, they clearly could be. And so how do you balance, like, they're not ready to give versus this person is just waiting to be inspired to give? And how do you, because on one hand, you could say everybody's just waiting to be inspired to give and spend a ton of cycles on people who aren't really qualified. But at the same time, if you go into binary with, are they ready or not, you might miss some opportunities to really warm people up and get them there. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally. And I think that depends on the job description of who's walking in, to this meeting. If someone is purely a major gift professional and they have a tight portfolio, lofty expectations of major gift work, then there is a little bit more of a binary approach there. But there needs to be the secondary strategy. If the answer is no, not now, which we get a lot, well then what is that engagement strategy? And Brent, you and I have had many conversations about that middle ground, where what if someone is not currently a major gift prospect? Because just to say I'm a major gift professional, it is my job to focus on those that tight group of people who are qualified to move them forward. Well, what do we do with those individuals who aren't quite certain, or maybe they're 5 to 10 years from being at that point? And I think that's an issue that our industry is dealing with broadly. Sometimes, that individual might get scooped up by inertia and get involved in an alumni association or whatnot, get involved in volunteer work that we put on. But can I sit here and tell you that we have a laser focused strategy for those people who are 5 to 10 years from being thumbs up? We don't. And if you have that secret sauce, I'll take you to dinner and steal it.
Well, we're working on a few recipes for that secret sauce, but I think what is clear is the issue that you've described. Across our customer base, we've got hundreds of customers, tens of millions of donor records, and what it shows us is that less than 2% of prospects are managed prospects. And even within that 2% managed pool, it can be very different from principal gift experience through, higher volume outreach programs. And what that means is, for 98% of the relationships at UConn or any institution, you have to nurture them without a human being involved. And so I think that's where there's clearly opportunities to be able to bring more of a human-to-human relationship beyond just 2%, because it is a little circular. Like, the reason somebody might not be ready to be a major gift prospect today isn't because they don't have money. It's because they haven't had that personalized attention over their life cycle. And it can feel, I'm sure you've had meetings where it's, where have you been the last 20 years? Now I've made partner, or I've done whatever, and you show up, and it doesn't mean there's still not an opportunity, but wouldn't have been better to be a partner on their journey the same way that, your career advisor at Ole Miss was able to be a partner on your journey. So we're not going to solve that, overnight, but I do think there are a lot of steps that can be taken, and we'll talk more about that in the coming months and years for sure. I do want to know though, like, you spent a stint at UAB in the athletics development space. And I think the athletics development space is really interesting because it can be high affinity. You've got fan passion, but then you've also got the philanthropic component. There can be a tit aspect. So there's a lot of creativity. But at the end of the day, it's, I think, one of the just high volume, more transactional kind of sales roles than maybe the gift planning, estate planning, creativity, structuring aspect. And so you started in a pretty transactional kind of role, and you've obviously elevated to be in much more of the strategic role. But what do you think about when you recall the time early in your career at UAB where it was maybe just more about volume?
And you're exactly right. Quite transactional, definitely about volume, about cash in the door. The way I look at it is it was incredible training for me to, because if you think about it as an athletic professional, that's on a far end of the continuum, from a transactional philanthropy to, profound, thoughtful philanthropy on the other end. And for me to go from an athletic development professional, and my very next role was a director of gift planning, which is the opposite end of the spectrum. It allowed me
not a lot of people jumping from athletics development to gift planning. And so I do want to know about, like, some of the memories from UAB, and then just how different it felt, and if there are any fun experiences at the beginning of the journey at Florida State.
it was such a joy. It was such a joy to do it because, and I love my time at UAB. It was great and shaped me into who I am today. But I remember my first trip, my donor trip. It was to Jacksonville, and I can tell you the main persons. I'm not going to say the person's name, but I can remember that was many years ago. But I remember executing the trip, and it's a standard trip. You drive over, you have your 2 p.m., then you have your 4 p.m., then the next day you have your 8:30, your 10 and your noon, and then you come home. And I remember my fellow gift planning colleague being there, like eagerly waiting on me to get back to the office. Like, how did it go? How did it go? And I just said, wow, like the ability to really, really have a thoughtful conversation about how someone wants to make a difference with philanthropy over time was refreshing. It was wonderful, but I've never lost that urgency that you have to have in athletic development. So it was just a great, great marriage. And I believe it was one reason why we were immensely successful in gift planning at Florida State. I mean, to a place where, as I reflect on it, I think, like, wow, we did that. And that was certainly a team effort, but it absolutely had something to do with training and previous experiences.
Can I ask what immensely successful means?
Yeah, you can. We were doing about 15 million per year in planned gifts. And I think, 3 years later, if we had a year under 40, it was a down year for us in gift planning. We just adopted that graceful, aggressive mentality and really started to lead. And from an ACC and SEC perspective, played a real leadership role in that community. Such a rewarding time, by far the most fun I've ever had in my career. That ACC SEC gift planning forum, which so many will know what I'm talking about. Such a rewarding time, and gift planning is just downright fun. And I'll tell you now, I still get in the weeds for fun. If there's a hairy gift planning, and we have a wonderful gift planning executive at UConn. He's top notch. But I still want to get involved just so I can geek out with him on some of these
All right,
more complex
let's
fields.
geek out. Let's geek out right now for a minute then. Give me your craziest gift planning, structuring, packaging story that you've had.
Oh gosh. Okay. I got it. I don't even need to think about it. So this would have been, 2014, I believe. Founder of an S Corp in Tallahassee was looking to do really a transformative planned gift, but he's using S Corp shares of the company. So we had a couple of issues there.
So private company, not a public company.
Exactly. So if you donating shares of an S Corp is not a tax friendly move. There's for the foundation, there's income tax to be paid, even though we're a nonprofit. And so what we did was work with his advisor to create an ESBIT. It's an elective small business trust. You fund the S Corp shares you fund the S Corp shares into the elective small business trust. And what happens is the income from that is far more tax friendly. We had a whole nother issue with valuation. Having to project values and then come back and discount that because we didn't want to feel like we were, stretching a little too much with valuation. But I believe that, that gift was 8 figures. It was an 8-figure gift. Probably took about 6 months to wrap the entire thing up. But just a wonderful way to use tax advisors, tax smart strategies to help the donor, and then ultimately make a transformative impact to the institution.
It's amazing. I'm pretty sure it'll be a while before ESBIT gets mentioned on the Raise podcast again. So, but I think it's an example. But I think like that is also the kind of thing where I bet there are a lot of potential donors, and you must come across this all the time in gift planning, who might not have significant liquid assets, therefore just assume that now is not the right time for them to give. And in reality, there are so many different ways. I mean, you just, shared a really far edge case creative structuring angle, but I think there are probably countless examples where it goes both way, right? Where an individual prospect might not have significantly identifiable, net worth in the traditional sense, but they actually do have assets. Um, and so they might get deprioritized because they don't maybe look as good on paper. But then at the same time, if they don't understand creative ways they can get involved, so I get why that has to be a pretty exciting role. And it sounds a lot like you're playing the financial advisor again.
Yeah, you got to be careful. You always have to. You really encourage them to bring their financial advisor in. I would always encourage them. Would you allow me to call your financial advisor and just update that individual?
Interesting.
But you're right. There are a lot of creative things that, especially in super low interest rate environments right now. I do think we're going to see an enormous uptick in charitable gift annuities in the same way that we did in 2010 and 2011, because it's so mutually beneficial. So that's my prediction on the podcast. Look up in mid 2021, and charitable annuities will be very, very hot ticket items.
Love it. This makes me think a little bit of conversations I've had in the past with a woman named Didi Mendoza, who's at Dartmouth College, and she actually works out of the West Coast office in the Bay Area, and she's been really creative in what she has coined pre-exit philanthropy. So basically, this idea of instead of thinking about plan giving being at the later end of someone's life, trying to figure out ways to do estate planning and so forth, for people that are founding companies in their 30s and their 40s, how can you engage them much earlier? It's like create structures or pledges or ways for them to essentially get involved philanthropically, recognizing that they aren't, in a strong liquidity position. But then also, what can the college do to actually help them on their journey? So when it comes time to make that ultimate ask, it's like, you were a partner that helped get me access to talent or partnerships or alumni who could help us. And it's such a to me, it's one of those examples that every university should just be doing in some capacity. And I think it is sort of a next gen cousin of traditional gift planning.
I agree, and I've certainly read about that, and we've done some things pretty recently at UConn around that. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, the most rewarding outcome of something like that would be truly a partnership. A partnership where the organization helped that individual, whether it be finding people to invest or finding pipeline, and ultimately they sell the company, and we have a predetermined sort of letter of intent that X% would come to do something that's again profoundly meaningful to that donor. So if there was ever a win-win philanthropy story that I hope to be a part of at some point, it's definitely that.
Love it. Well, I want to shift the discussion to one of the things we're really excited to talk about today, which is you're serving in a frontline leadership role at an organization that has been growing revenue and was trending in the right direction, and then COVID hit. And I found a stat that said, I just heard this the other day, that on April 16th of 2020, airline traffic was 3.6% in the United States of what it was on April 16th of 2019. Wow. That April 16th apparently was the absolute trough as it relates to travel. And we all know that most of the people on airplanes are major gift officers. And so I just have to ask you what it was like coming into COVID, really on a high, in a revenue generating high growth organization, but then also how you had to pivot your communication style, your leadership style, to ensure that you were able to not only start fiscal 20 with good momentum, but end it with strong momentum. And then frankly, as we sit here in mid-July, how you're thinking about approaching fiscal 21, recognizing that while airline volume is maybe now 10 or 20% of what it was a year ago, it's unlikely that we're going to be doing significant field visits in the way that you described your first trip to Jacksonville anytime soon. And so take us through that journey, leading in times of plenty and leading in times of crisis.
Yeah. So, as I look back, we were told March the 12th that, I think that's a Thursday, we were told that starting that following Monday, we would be remote. But it was all within the narrative of a couple of weeks. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but, it was my thought process, everyone's thought process was, let's lock down, let's put our mask on, and this thing will be gone in 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll be back to normal. Like I kept saying that. And that didn't happen, right? It still hasn't happened. And, Brent, it took an epiphany, and I shared it with my team, apologetically, on a development team call. I don't know when that happened. It probably would have been late April, I'm guessing. But what I said was, I apologize for remaining in that framework of when we get back to normal, when we're able to come back. And I would say that all the time. And my epiphany was, I have to stop that. No longer is that going to be something I want to talk about. I want to talk about moving forward. And my point to them was, we have to start acting, planning, and speaking like this is the way of life. We know how to come back to our traditional, normal way of doing business. And if we're blessed enough to be able to do that at some point in time, sooner rather than later, then we'll go back to it. But from this point forward, I want us all in the same style, the same framework of saying, this is how we're going to do it. And also, also stopping anytime we would have a Zoom call, anytime we would have a development team, and I'm talking big, which was 60, 70, 80 people on these, just absolutely stop that verbiage of, I'm looking forward to getting back together. I miss seeing you, because what I felt like it was holding us back. And so I said, today we're embracing it, and we have embraced it. And that was changing metrics. That was changing interactions within our database. That was me, again, getting out of this. I wish we could go back and be in the same room. That was me telling big and bold stories about my engagement opportunities on Zoom with donors, and just really changing the lens through which we view this as, this is our life. And instead of dealing with it, quote unquote, it's time to be the best in our peer group or the best in our industry at this. And I'm not saying we've gotten there, but we've certainly opened our eyes to the fact that this is the way of life. And if we don't think innovatively, then we're going to be put out of business, as in any business. If you reject innovation, you're going to get left behind. And we've decided not to do that, and we're going to be on the front edge of this.
How did your team react? Because I think there's a certain element of just ambiguity is disconcerting to people. And having conviction around a path, even if it's the wrong path, I found to be better than lack of clarity. And so I'm guessing that, I also will say as a leader, it's been really hard to read the room when it's a bunch of Zoom boxes, and to get the sort of nonverbal cues and so forth. That has been a huge challenge for me. I'm curious how you have handled that.
Yeah. So, that's interesting that you say that, because 6:30, I sent a sort of a year-end email to the whole development division. And it was just a very authentic email about my reflections. And you ask anybody, I am who I am. I'm authentic. There's no, VP alter ego. I mean, I'm just Jake. And I write that way. And so I, of course, thank people and celebrated where we're going to end up. But then I just offered my own reflections. And Brent, it's funny, it really began with that first Zoom development team meeting. Because I always pour myself into those team meetings. And you can ask any of my staff. It's not just updates and we go home. When we incorporate TED Talks, we incorporate guest speakers, we have games, we do things like that. And I remember that first one. And you asked my wife, I said, I'm so nervous. Like, and I'm not a nervous guy. Like, what if people don't engage? What if it's dead silence? What if I ask for a question through the chat box and there's no questions? I mean, the burden that I felt was something that I haven't necessarily felt before in my career. And it just seemed like every development team meeting, because it was such a push for engagement. I just said, look, if we can't be in the same room, and I know people are dealing with stress, of course, in their professional lives, but I don't know the burden that everyone is feeling in their personal life, who they're caring for, and the worries that they have for their loved ones. And so I'm going to take every development team meeting, and we are going to incorporate something that is uplifting, something that is edifying and positive and engaging. And my executive assistant, she and I would sit on the phone for an hour and strategize about what can we do next Thursday to move the morale needle. And we just came up with anything and everything we could. And it's been a project that has paid off.
Well, tell me a little bit about how that's paid off, because on one hand, it's how do you be empathetic? How do you be authentic? But on the other hand, how do you drive excellent results in an environment that you've not worked in before, that your team hasn't operated in before? You change metrics, you change interactions, you change your approach to leadership. What are some of the bullet points that you would cite as being the most meaningful?
Yeah. So, I think when you set robust goals, if it's non-COVID time or especially COVID time, when you set those, I think you've got to do sort of two things around ambitious goal setting. And it's not about setting a number, it's the way that you do it. And so if we back up, again, in a normal year or pre-COVID, when I'm setting focus themes for divisions or departments within development, when I'm setting number goals, I'm not doing that in a vacuum, and I have found that engaging all people who want to be engaged in decisions and goal setting. I'm not forcing people to be engaged in it, but it doesn't matter what level you are in the organization. If you're an assistant director in the business school and you want to have a say-so in what goals should be, it's not only okay to do that, it's encouraged to do that. And so I feel like there's buy-in because a lot of people have a lot of say-so in goals. It's not consensus, and I sometimes have to make difficult decisions. But if I'm setting an ambitious goal, you have been a part of that. You have buy-in in those goals. There's one other thing I have to do, and from my perspective, and that is incentivize you to do that. On that continuum of motivation, there's coercion at one end and then there's monetary reward at the other. And I don't believe that the coercion side of here's your ambitious goal, and if you don't hit it, we're going to separate. I don't believe that motivates people, and I don't think it works. But on the other end, if I'm going to hold you accountable for ambitious goals that we've never necessarily thought about, I have to couple that with, and if you do reach these, I am enthusiastically thrilled to reward you with compensation. And Brent, it's worked. It's worked. My first year here, we probably had 45 development professionals, 6 reached visit goal. Now, I wasn't here the whole year. I let things play out a little bit through half the year. 6. And again, set goals in a robust way, put incentive comp into place, kind of remove toxicity from the situation. And last year we had 30 out of the 45. And that's not coincidence. And it's certainly not development officers acting out of survival and out of fear. It is acting out of positive energy and positive monetary incentives.
What was it like to introduce it? Because I think one of the real missed opportunities in the sector is you just don't hear development officer and incentive comp in the same sentence very often. Some people get very uncomfortable with that. It can mean a lot of different things, but what balance have you been able to strike, and why are you so confident that it's the right path forward?
Yeah, so I've thought about incentive comp for many, many years. Wasn't necessarily a fit in my prior job, but when I came to UConn, I had an entrepreneurial leader, and when I pushed it to him with some strength and some conviction, he said, "Put it together. Let's do it." And it's not just about the thing is that you got to structure incentive comp in a way that moves the needle for everyone. It's not you hit a number, I pay you money. It's tiered. We have 3 tiers. Tier 1 is all about individual metrics. Tier 2 is all about team metrics. Tier 3 is about the entire organization's metrics. So what happens is you get people rowing in the same direction. You get people looking through the lens of unit team goals rather than individual goals. And I've always said this: if I have a development professional that has had a $2 million goal in the past, and I think about what would it mean for that individual to go from 2 million to 2.5, that's great. And that's a wonderful thing, but it is not nearly as impactful as the unit going from $10 million to $15 million. And that was a big project here, getting people to start to pay attention to unit goals, not only development officers, but deans and academic leaders too. So I had to build that into this incentive comp model. And I believe that the 3-tier structure that we have, I believe it motivates people, and it sets us up for success in the future.
I know that there's not, and one of the risks in this sector is that everybody now wants to know, well, what exactly is your model, and can I go implement it at my institution? I'm sure that there's some nuance to what made sense for your context, but are there principles when you think about what percentage the incentive needs to be in order for it to be meaningful enough to motivate people, but also not so significant that it feels like too much of their compensation is at risk?
Hey, that's a great question, and a really interesting debate with a board. You talk to an exec committee of our board. Remember, our board's made up of a lot of finance professionals on Wall Street and Fairfield County, Connecticut, and so it was interesting me defending this incentive comp model, which is modest. It is not something where people are looking at significant variable compensation. It is something that is meaningful. It's something that an individual will feel, but it certainly doesn't tip the scales into some sort of variable comp production model, because that wouldn't sit well with me. And not that that's all that important how I feel. I care more about how it changes human behavior with my team, and I don't think a model like that would change it for the positive.
And so it sounds like you have, through a combination of creative incentives, clearer expectations, goal setting, removing toxicity, been able to really turn around performance across the team. As you think about fiscal 21, it's got to be somewhat challenging, though, because all of that behavior change and performance improvement was in the old way of doing our work. Yeah. And so when you think about this Zoom-only world that we're in, where do you see things going over the next year? And have you had to further adjust either goals or compensation, et cetera?
Yeah, Brent, I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, what this is going to look like, because, it's not just the virtual model of communication. It's what really has been the effect on the economy, on the job market. How will the stock market respond after the enormous sell-off and now this rebound that, we're not quite sure what's behind that rebound. So there are a lot of unemployment rate, a lot of factors here that we don't know. I would say that I have encouraged and will encourage my team to just jump head first in. When there are doubts and confidence of how really am I going to be able to engage this person or this couple or this family by Zoom, it's all we got right now. So be authentic, be yourself. I would say, I for one, when I have my interactions with donors this coming fiscal year, I'll probably say, I'd love to be able to engage you in the following way and have lunch with your student and X, Y, and Z, but if I'm not able to do that, I'll let them know. Maybe asking them questions about how can we demonstrate impact better, in this virtual world. How can you be engaged? I think this is going to be a dance that the donors and the organizations dance together. And all we can do is keep a positive outlook, stay innovative in the way we're thinking, stay true to goals. I'm not lowering goals this year. They'll be robust. They'll be higher than they were last year. Stick together, create a high morale shop, and maybe we talk again on 7/20 of 21, and hopefully we've surpassed goals at that point as well.
I think we have adjusted, and we have all started to realize there are ways we can be more efficient. And so I am optimistic that even in our ability to engage with each other, your staff's ability to engage with your donors, everybody has more time. We are all a Zoom link away. And while it's not maybe quite as fulfilling always as being together in person, we can just do a whole lot more of it than the itinerary that you described the first time you drove over to Jacksonville. And instead of having 4 or 5 visits in a 2-day period and feeling like that's a pretty good, efficient, middle of the plate trip, you might be able to have 20 conversations or 10 conversations in the same amount of time at a radically lower cost. And we might find out that we are able to advance the philanthropic impact that our donors still want to have, whether it's in person or over Zoom.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Quantity will increase. And, I just think it's our job to make sure that quality remains quality.
Right.
And
I think the quality in some cases might be able to get even better because we are going to be able to be creative, and you're going to be able to invite a dean to join you in a conversation with a donor when the dean never could have traveled to actually do the field visit with you. So from a donor experience perspective, it might actually be even better than just seeing Jake one-on-one. No offense. It's how do we start to make that whole experience more complete? Maybe presidents of universities can be engaged in stewardship and donor touch points because they're only a Zoom link away, instead of trying to navigate the president's schedule to go do a trip to Los Angeles or wherever it might be. So I am optimistic that we're going to be able to scale really compelling experiences to a broader group of people.
Love it.
Great. Well, Jake, I want to be conscious of time, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing your journey professionally at UConn over the last year, the pivots you've had to make. No doubt when we catch up on July 20th of 2021, that we'll have all kinds of new experiences and perspective. But what I love about our conversations is you always have a great sense of optimism. And I think that same just expected outcome approach, can serve us all really well here in the next year.
Well, thanks for having me on. I always enjoy catching up with you, Brent. Look forward to catching up with you soon. And I'm here to help in any way.
All right. Signing off with Jake Lemon, Senior Vice President of Development for the UConn Foundation. Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Brent. Talk soon.